Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about movements and initiatives that seek to move humanity to its next epochal iteration. This podcast is brought to you by Witlingo. When it comes to managing a community, one of the keys to success is the ability to effectively communicate with the members of that community. If you are a service coordinator or responsible for community engagement, Witlingo provides a multi-channel, multilingual notification and engagement platform to help you work more efficiently and effectively. For more information, please visit www.witlingo.com. That's www.witlingo.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid.
I'm gonna ask you very quickly two things, sort of a pushback, just for the sake of, having a dialogue, right? And then I'm gonna do this thought experiment. Number one, it seems to me that what you're saying is that people or Democrats or the base, if you want to call it that, is sort of living in a sort of a false consciousness. They don't know how good they have it. Sort of it's a messaging failure as opposed to this is what they feel, and they are the pudding, right? That's it, right? So what they don't feel like they've gotten better since whatever the reasons may be, right? And then if you feel stuck, which I think I think you agree with that. There's a lot of folks who feel stuck, right? If you're stuck, then and especially if you feel stuck and you're in a desperate situation, and people are in desperate situations, you get a medical diagnosis that is not good, then that's it. Basically, you're bankrupt, right? And there is, and it doesn't have to be where, the pain is not when you get that, it's the fear, the anxiety that you live, the couple of jobs that you have to have, and everybody has to work at home, right? To be able to maintain a lifestyle and so on. And so there is, I think, and so the pushback, not necessarily, I don't 100% believe in the pushback, but the pushback would be fair to say that. Why do you say that? Why do you say that it's actually a messaging problem as opposed to a real problem? And people are, in fact, just they've had it with the establishment, and they want to just continue to, find a way to return the outrage.
That's a very good question. I think a big part of it is, and I will go back to something that was said by the Bush people in the lead up to 2004 election. I think it was a profile by Ron Suskind in the New York Times Magazine, which is just like, this is talking about foreign affairs. It's just like, you don't sort of get it. You in the reality-based community, you do your facts and analysis. We're beyond that. We create our own reality, and you can go out there and diligently study it. And then we'll be on to something else and create our own reality. I think part of the challenge I think Democrats have had is that it's very hard for what we actually want to accomplish to get that through Congress and passed and have people feel the benefits of it in time before the next election. And I think part of the challenge. Bill Clinton is a little bit different, but under Obama, there was always this belief, this always tension of to be good job numbers, good economic indicators, but they didn't want to seem like they were not appreciating the challenges that people were having and the suffering people were having. And there was we're much less likely to say, this is the reality, this is our reality, and then be really forceful about it, the way that the Republicans are. This belief that the Donald Trump economy from, I guess, the last year doesn't count, the 2017 to 2019 pre-COVID economy was not the greatest economy ever. It's been better in the last 2 years under Biden. It was better under different times under Obama and Clinton.
Well, a lot of it that was good was actually just coattails from Obama,
Exactly. It's you look at the chart of the stock market growth from the beginning of Obama's term and the job growth, and you take away the time axis. It's just okay, where in that is did it shift from Obama to Trump? And you couldn't tell. It's just a straight line. You could see COVID. But yeah, it was taking credit for that. But I mean, part of like politics and part of being successful is just like define what the reality is and have that be the narrative and story that people are filtering that through. Just as much from the negative side, and like from 1979 to 1980, the Republicans were very successful at using the images of gas lines and inflation.
Mhm.
This is what a democratic economy gives you. And they were able to like run on that for like 20 years. And that's part of the narrative and stories. And people think mostly in narratives
Yeah.
and so it's like if one side has to tell an effective story, and we don't do that as well. I mean, and it's understandable why people are frustrated with the establishment. And the part of the things that drive me crazy when they say, oh, Congress is the problem, the establishment is the problem. No, it's very specific people that are blocking things from happening. And like Republicans just sort of want people to get frustrated and upset at the system and check out and not pay attention because that's the easier way for the oligarchs to rob us blind. Is just like the only people really paying attention to politics and caring are the lobbyists and the special interests. The more people are caring and engaged in politics, engaged in their life, engaged in democracy, the harder it is for the special interests to be successful. That's I think that's sort of what the goal that, at least for me, and what think the goal of the Democratic Party should be, which is the widest possible participation, and then telling people and narrating them, this is why you're frustrated. These are the specific people causing that. If you elect me, I'm going to do these things to take power away from them and give it back to you. That's what I think the element of successful politics of
Yeah.
2024 and beyond are going to be.
But
But I
why?
think part of it is just you have to tell
Yeah.
people a story and you
Mhm.
have to give them heroes and villains. And that's what Donald Trump does very effectively and that we don't do effectively.
But how can someone, because I've heard that story told, I don't buy it for the following reason. How can I buy that story when in 2016 the DNC sabotaged Bernie Sanders, and they did it again in 2020, with having those guys drop out, but Elizabeth what's her name? Dole, I said. Elizabeth Warren staying in, and so on. I don't buy it. I think the establishment decided it was Hillary in 2016, and they did everything possible, and we have evidence from WikiLeaks and all that. They did that. It's not democratic. They did the same thing in 2020. I mean, that guy was dead in the waters after the first three, what's his name? Biden, right? After the
Yeah.
first three. He was done, he's done, it was done with, right? North Carolina came in, that guy, and then they maneuvered Obama. So this is the story I'm hearing, right? It was
Yeah.
engineered that he is the guy. He's the guy, and the people, they can say whatever they want to say, they can vote for whoever they want to vote. They don't know. The people don't know. They're mistaken. They don't know, right? So I don't buy the notion that Democratic Party is actually all about inclusiveness. It is for me, and I'm a Democrat, and for the first time, I may not vote Democrat because I'm totally for many other reasons, right? Disillusioned, disgusted, again for other reasons than economics, right? By what I believe to be the establishment Democrat. So is it true, this notion that Democratic Party is really inclusive, that they care about listen to other voices, or is that posturing and what do you call that, virtue signal and all that stuff? Given these three big data points that I just gave you,
Yeah.
of sabotaging what I think was a candidate who might have had a better chance of beating because he was a populist, right? And it was a clash of, I think it was, if it was a clash of populists, I think there was a chance for him to win in the key states like Michigan, which astonishingly, right?
Yeah.
Hillary lost. Astonishingly, she didn't even go there, apparently, at least towards the end. And to your point, because they were not doing the right things in terms of knowing what's going on. But, if for somebody like me right now who's pushing back against the notion that Democrats really are not an establishment party, they're far more, what would you say?
I would say that there really, I guess technically there is a Democratic establishment. There are people in Washington who work at the DNC, and there are people that like are involved in politics, and um, there really isn't. The establishment doesn't really have that as much power as people think that it does. The DNC is not capable of rigging anything. There may have been people there who favored Hillary Clinton, but if the DNC really wanted to rig the primaries in 2016, Bernie wouldn't have like even registered. Like the Bernie Sanders was a tremendously successful campaign, because he did tap into that frustration. But he also was wildly successful. He like destroyed Hillary in New Hampshire. I think he raised as much money as she did. Um, was very effective at like coming close in a bunch of states, like coming out of nowhere to be as successful as he was. I think the reason he didn't become the nominee wasn't anything that was nefarious that happening in Washington. It was just mistakes that was made in the campaign and in resource allocations. And then just not doing enough to pulling out victories in Iowa and Nevada and winning by more in some places. Like he just got into a street fight and just narrowly lost to another candidate, which happens. I don't think I honestly really don't believe that there's anything that the DNC or like these party operatives or consultants and sort of hangers on and lobbyists can really do that's going to impact the vote that much. And in 2020 was just weird, but part of it is like part of the reason Bernie did not become the nominee was that the campaign had a strategy of look, if since there's so many different candidates in the field, if we can get 30% of the vote, given the delegate rules, we can get over 50% of the delegates. And as long as there's all these candidates running, that they're able to do that. And there was a couple of things that went wrong in the 2020 campaign for Bernie that I don't think have been fully appreciated. One was in 2016, he had really, really good ad people who created very effective, um, emotional spots that were very different than most TV spots. And in a lot of primaries, like the initial polling, he'd be way behind Hillary. They do a flight of ads, and then it'd be like neck and neck and tie. And he didn't have that same ad company working for 2020. His content was much flatter. And I think the other assumption would be like there was a whole fad within like a bunch of the candidates running and within like the sort of like data world that like, oh, ads don't mean anything, they're not that important, and having quality ads isn't that big of a deal. So like Elizabeth Warren's team, like there weren't like a lot of ads that were run except by Tom Steyer and Mike Bloomberg, who just blanketed the airways. And I think the assumption Bernie had was like he had the money, he could be the one candidate who could be on the air and do what he did in 2016, which is like in the month leading up to the election, he'll be the only one in the airwaves, because Elizabeth Warren wasn't doing it. Biden had no money. But like I remember being in California in February, and it's like you couldn't turn on the TV. Like you'd see 5, 8, 10, 15 Bloomberg ads from every one Bernie ad. And the Bernie ads just did not stand out. And like Bloomberg and Steyer, like you'd think they were the only people running in the race, but like what they were doing was not actually transferring that into votes. So the theory, like, and then Bernie just underperformed. Like he got like far fewer votes in Iowa than he did 4 years before, and almost lost to Pete Buttigieg. He did way worse in New Hampshire than he did before. So it's like, but was like winning, but not racking up the big delegate leads he would have. And he was always vulnerable to everyone dropping out. But everyone dropped out at once because they all ran out of money and they knew they had no chance to win. Pete Buttigieg saw what he did in South Carolina and realized that, oh yeah, I'm going to get no black votes at all. Bernie pulled out of South Carolina, and like it wasn't even so much that Biden Biden was able to hang on and come in second place in Nevada. And then, like, after the Nevada victory, which should have been Bernie's crowning achievement, because that was his,
Mhm.
like, he won a state with a diverse electorate. Um, and he then went and did this weird 60-minute interview where he was defending Castro. Um, they made a whole bunch of strategic mistakes, and he gave a very sort of hostile speech that night. Instead of giving a speech of just sort of welcome, this is how I'm going to be a nominee for everyone in the party,
You mean on the
he
eve
pretty
of
much did his usual fuck you.
right? But was
And
it at the eve of North Carolina? Was that
that was after Nevada, after he won in Nevada, and then leading
okay?
into South Carolina.
In
And then
South Carolina.
everyone else
Yeah.
ran out of money, and like
Okay.
I don't think it was like a real, you could see like all these like people coming from behind of just like, oh, this is how we're going to beat Bernie. Um, but Bernie still did pretty well on Super Tuesday after that. It was just Biden, and then in the head-to-head debate, Biden was just better in the debate. But Bernie's strategy like was never like, how do I get in a position to be one-on-one? Can I win a one-on-one race? It was always to win this multi-candidate field. And he never did what any good, successful politician does, which is at the moment where you have a big victory, you have power, and people are hostile to you, reach out, and then stay focused and disciplined. So he was always, yes, the establishment in Washington did not want him to be president, but they didn't really stop it either. It was always a combination of like mistakes within the campaign, bad luck and bad timing. But if like he got the same number of votes in Iowa and New Hampshire in 2020 that he did in 2016, he would have destroyed that field and would have been the nominee.
Yeah, but that remind me, there were a lot. Maybe there weren't a lot more candidates in 2020,
Yeah,
16. And so by definition, that would, you know, by
that should
definition,
have helped him.
no,
That was going to help
I'm
him
saying
as
there
long
was
as
a
they
lot
ran.
more a lot more fragmentation, perhaps. Maybe I'm getting it upside down. Um, and then all of a sudden, like a whole bunch of them drop at just the right time, which is suspicious to me. But I get what you're saying, and so that's very useful actually. Um, and then let's not forget 2024, right, where there were no primaries, where right, no debates, and maybe you can tell me why, because I'm mystified. Why would Biden do a debate before the convention? Because usually these debates they happen after the conventions.
Yeah,
Since ever that I remember, you don't do a debate between folks who have not even been nominated yet. Why did he do that? And number one, number two, why did Trump? I mean, after the fact, it seems that both of them made a mistake strategically, right? One of them, tipped his hand, sort of. He showed that I mean, if he had had that debate in October, there's no way that they could have, or September, as
yeah,
two, right? And then same thing with Trump. If he hadn't had that debate, the guy wouldn't have withdrawn because he wants to run against him. Like, why did he
yeah.
accept the debate, and why did they both accept the debate? Because I remain unable to explain it, to be honest with you.
I was kind of surprised that Trump actually did accept that debate. Um, the, at the time, I
Yeah.
think everyone in the Democratic world was frustrated with the fact that um, Trump really got no scrutiny. Like I thought that that during the primary, he would be forced to debate, and there'd be the Republican primary would be a lot more competitive than what it was. And he got away with not debating, and he essentially like won all these contests pretty easily, despite
Yeah.
all the money that Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley raised. And I think the Biden team was frustrated with that Trump was not being covered. Like if you watch one of his rallies, like he's as crazy as ever. And like the threat of him being president, it didn't feel like it was being covered, and people really weren't paying attention or tuning into the race. And it's just like the only exposure they were really getting, they weren't really exposed to Trump. Like the best thing that happened to Trump after January 6th was being thrown off Twitter, being thrown off Facebook, and essentially being deplatformed by all the major networks. Like, and he's been like doing rallies and being on all these like different right-wing channels and right-wing websites and communicating is in Truth Social, communicating like he always did, but like the degree of it was not actually penetrating like the normal political conversation. And I think given like where Biden was in the polls and with the way that Trump was being covered very differently than he had the previous two races, that the only way to actually shake up the contours of the race would be like have a debate, have Trump be like Trump, and people would just like what really hadn't seen him in 4 years would just be like, oh my God, yeah, that's right. I really hated that guy, and I really don't want that again. That was their theory. It's like there was the people voters were not engaging in that race at all. And to wait for September for voters to finally engage is like, oh yeah, really is the choice. And oh my God, Trump, wow, this is not even what I remember from before, was that the debate would be the only way to kickstart that.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But that at least that's
yeah.
the rational. I
I
think
mean, at
that's the
least,
rational way. I don't know why Trump agreed to that debate. Like
right.
there was actually no reason for him to do it other than I think he likes being the center of attention.
Yeah, yeah, maybe what mystifies me more actually, and you explained it in terms of strategy and so on, in terms of exposing Trump, and maybe people forgot what kind of a monster he is and all that. But I mean, we knew, I mean, starting in I mean, when he was elected, Biden, and the months after that, we've seen a decline. And I mean, they wouldn't even let him take questions, right? Months before, right? You're gonna put him for 90 minutes, right? Was it 90 minutes or 60? I don't remember. You know,
It felt
right?
like out. It felt like 8 hours.
Hours.
I can't
I couldn't watch. I
remember.
couldn't. I watched 5 minutes and then I knew it was a disaster. So I turned it off. But you know, I mean, sincerely, I mean, did they think that he was gonna do? He was now going to just mess up? Anyway, I'm kind of
I
mystified a little bit.
I don't really know. But from what I've read, like Biden keeps a very close inner circle and people who are very loyal to him. And like I think after the State of the Union, when he like completely overperformed anyone's expectations, that like they I think that's always part of the Biden narrative, which is everyone counts Joe Biden out, and then he delivers every single time.
Yeah, yeah,
And like he might be old, but it's just like he is experienced, and just like any time that you think he's not going to be able to perform to do it, he always exceeds expectations.
yeah.
And
I
like
think
the Republicans were playing into that because they were like accusing him of like, oh, he's going to do whatever drug cocktail he did from the State of the Union, and he'll be drugged, he'll have some handicap that, but they didn't think that this was what happened was going to happen either. And if they did, that's probably maybe they did, and that's why they agreed to the debate. But
well, I
that
mean, I don't
was
want to get into
not
conspiracy
how they
theories,
acted.
right? But it would not surprise me that I don't know. I don't have a satisfying, to be honest with you, sort of theory as to what happened from both sides. Maybe Trump, perhaps he wanted to look presidential because at that point still he was looking like a criminal, although he is, right? I mean, he's a convicted criminal. Convicted, he is, right? He's convicted.
Yeah,
And so he wanted perhaps to change his image, maybe, but I think he regretted having, knocked him out, because now it's all scrambled. So I want to do this experiment quickly because I think, and I've been doing it I'm going to be doing it throughout the season. I've been it 3 times, and as a
yeah,
poster, I think it's going to be interesting to see your reaction to it, which is as follows: that today, when we elect someone, right, it's basically, you want a Trumpy kind of a person, or you want somebody reasonable. That's how I see it, right?
yeah,
It's not the issues as such. I mean, the issues, of course, are important, but there's a level of agency that the representative will have to do as they please, so to speak, to vote as they want, so to speak, as long as they maintain, the stand on the key important issues like reproductive rights, gun control for Democrats, and vice versa for,
yeah,
so there are 4 or 5 things that red lines. Otherwise, basically, do we increase the budget for the military or not? That's sort of nonpartisan, and nobody really is gonna hold Don Bayer, who is my representative, his feet to the fire because, you know, did he vote for Ukraine or not, or whatever, right? So there's a lot of agency, a lot of sort of space for these representatives to do according to the lobbyists, according to the donors, according to a certain extent their conscience, right?
Yeah.
And when it comes to re-election in 2 years or 6 years, right, for senators, it's all about ensuring that you don't break the covenant when it comes to the core issues, right? Now,
Yeah.
experiment is as follows. Imagine instead of that kind of an arrangement where your representative really is not really representing you, that he or she is representing a whole constellation of pressures and so forth. If they represented you to a T, meaning for every single bill, and let's not think about how, right? Let's just think about
Yeah.
what if, right? Every single bill, right, that comes in front of you, right, you are no more than an avatar of your people. And let's say you, the pollster. That's why I want to talk to
Yeah.
you, the pollster. You, the pollster, somehow figure out a mechanism to, for every single bill, right? I don't know, you have a sample of 1,000 people as representative and so on, and you go back to them, track polling, right? And you say, boom, and then they vote through an app, whatever it may be. Let's forget about it. So for every bill, there is something called the will of the majority, 50+%, right? And then
Yeah.
you, the representative, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what you believe, doesn't matter whatever. You simply push the button that the people told you to push, yay or nay, all right? Now, imagine that we had such a system, right? Do you think, and I'm using this extreme system, this extreme experiment, just because I think it's going to help me clarify some issues in my head, as I think about what does it mean for us to live in a democracy, right? For example, in 2016, atrocious as the result was, it was democratic in the sense that we have more participation. Perhaps we're not happy with the people who participated, but it was definitely a lot more.
Yeah.
And the more participation you have, the closer you get to democracy, whether you like the results or not. Let's assume that the vast majority of this country, and they are not, right, are stand on some issue in a very bad way, right? Which I think is the case, because I think what happens when you have sort of a spectrum of folks voting, you have sort of a dilution of the extremes. They drop off, right? You sort of
Yeah.
get to the middle, right? So in this case, if you had that system, such a system that I just described, which I'm calling like true representation, then things like, I don't know, assault weapon banning, perhaps, right? If you look at the polls, it would pass. The public option would pass. Reduce the military budget would pass. There's a whole lot of issues where issue after issue, there is definitely a consensus among the people, like, reproductive rights, they would pass, and with flying colors. Like, even, in, what is it, Kansas? I always confuse Kansas and Arkansas. Kansas, right? Kansas, remember they passed, they tried to fool them, and then it was 2 years ago, right? And then
Yeah. On the abortion amendment. Yeah.
even there, right? So there is definitely a consensus, right? So the experiment, my question to you is, first of all, as a pollster, it would sort of like take your business to the whole next level, because we poll people all the time, right? But what do you think? What's your gut feel about that kind of a sort of really almost direct democracy, but without shaking up the system? Meaning we have courts, we have representatives, we have elections, we have the electoral college. We don't need rank voting. We don't need all of this innovation, or we don't need a lot of those things that people say, or campaign finance reform. You don't need it because the lobbyists. Okay, what are you going to do when you go to
Yeah.
buy him? You can't buy him because he's a machine. He's going to push buttons as per. What do you think?
I think that sounds very appealing. It's always funny. It's just like that's always the characterization of sort of the insincere politician is the one who sticks their finger in the wind and then just
Yes.
does what the polls say. It's just like, kind of wish we'd actually have a few more of
I wish
those.
we had, and then the other one, the flip of it, just the flip of it is, look at this politician. He's so courageous. He voted against the will of the people. But go on.
Yeah, no, it was flip-flopping because he did a poll, which I guess is you're never supposed to change your mind. I think that is a very appealing idea. I'm instantly going to the ways that can be manipulated.
Sure.
And the biggest thing is just it's because we have experiments like this in all these states that allow ballot initiatives and issues and people to put questions on the ballot and then vote on them. I think we will still have the same problem of big money trying to influence public opinion and to get people to, instead of electing people that are going to vote against their interests, to vote against their interests directly. And I'll give some examples of that. This is sort of one of my favorite ones of this campaign, very frustrating campaign that I worked on, which is it was to pass a soda tax in the city of Santa Fe to pay for universal preschool.
Okay.
And both of those ideas were like very popular. And then the soda industry hired consultants. Actually, this initiative happened in 2017. They hired a firm that worked with Hillary in 2016, and they came up with this slogan of like, "There's a better way for pre-K," which is that this is the, and then within that, like that was sort of the top message, which was using a Paul Ryan slogan to try to defeat a soda tax to pay for pre-K in one of the most liberal cities in America. And it ended up working because the other part of it was just playing into the inequality that exists there between sort of the wealthy Anglos and the like lower middle class income Hispanic voters of just
Who buys?
like
Yeah.
yeah, it's all sort of like the sort of like the people are looking down at you, soda tax, you're looking down on me, all the various different resentments that exist. I think your system is vastly superior to what we have, but it is still open to
Yeah.
manipulation
Yeah. Yeah.
by the outside because people like they have lots of opinions on issues, but most of them aren't very well held and can be manipulated. I think you'd have to do a system like that, but also really like restrict money, and influence campaigns
In terms
very
of
aggressively.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that it is not perfect, but the perfect is the enemy of the good, as they say, whatever, right?
Exactly.
And whenever we compare anything to perfect, it's going to fall short. But I can just keep on thinking about how it would just castrate, if I may use that, the lobbyists, because the representative is not there, and he or she cannot vote according to what you want. I think the money would go, like you're saying, would go into media manipulation. No, just the
Yeah.
message, right? Spend a lot of, but the thing is, there's only so much money that can be spent, and it's a lot harder to influence millions of people than to influence one guy, right? Which is the representative to buy that person, right, off systematically, right, and have them vote systematically against the will of the people, as long as I said, as long as they stay within the boundaries of not violating the taboos within their party. Anyway, I'm thinking about this a lot more, and it feels to me that things like campaign finance reforms are not going to go anywhere because the people themselves, right? Why
Yeah.
would term limits? I don't think they're going to happen. All right, reforming the Supreme Court, I don't think it's going to happen. Abolishing the electoral college, it's not going to happen. I mean, we've been listening about, we've been hearing about term limits for decades. Same
Yeah.
thing with finance. Same thing with electoral. Every election. Oh, I wish we had direct elections and so forth. And it's not. And so the question is, we are in a quandary. Let me ask you two questions, and then I have really abused my time with you on this Saturday, and I
Okay.
really appreciate you.
No problem. This is good procrastination from all the work I have to do after this anyway.
Appreciate that. So one, do you believe that democracy is in a state of peril? Because I hear that all the time, number one. And then number two is, what do you think? I can't let you go without asking you, what do you think is going to happen in coming up this November, both in terms of the House and as well as the Senate, as well as the presidency? But first, do you think that we are in a state of peril, we being the United States, perhaps even the world, or let's call it the free world, in terms of the state of democracy? Is it that fragile? Is it in peril? What do you think?
Um, there are a lot of bad actors who have tools right now that they haven't had before,
Mhm.
both in terms of the ability to hack right directly into people's brains in a way that
Yeah.
just is not, that's new. We also have very, very wealthy in
Mm.
people that sort of transcend
Mhm.
countries, people like
Mhm.
Elon Musk and very wealthy people who are figuring out ways to have their extremism reflected in government and manipulate government.
Mhm.
That I think imperils us in ways that we don't imagine. I think just in terms of democracy and the ability to vote and the ability to have free speech and to um, all the sort of narratives about America. I think that if people become more engaged and more aware and more educated of what is happening and demand their power back, that will eventually. We're just sort of in these different push-pull periods,
Mm.
and I do think like the idea that we're just not gonna have elections anymore in America and that choices are all rigged and just like I don't think that's ever going to be true because there's always going to be people who are going to be able to run against that, who
Yeah.
are going to become very, very popular.
All
And
right.
you could like the idea that someone like AOC like came out of nowhere in 2018 and beat an entrenched incumbent and became a political celebrity, whatever people might think about her now, there's always going to be people like that who
Yeah.
are going to be able to there's lots of ways to hack the US electoral system and all of its like flaws for bad. There's also ways to beat it for good. And that's just like a different cycle is going to happen. And so I don't think democracy, I don't think American democracy is in a lot of ways it's always in peril and but there'll be ways that it's also resilient. And I think we just got to focus on ways to make it more
Yeah.
resilient.
Yeah.
um, I'm a big believer, like we need to pass real anti-corruption legislation, and that should be the central focus, I think, for Kamala Harris. And like we can't have freedom without like real, real strong anti-corruption legislation and anti-corruption laws. And that's just I think that's something that will have to come if we're going to actually address all the things that you care about, like a public option and um, banning automatic weapons and all of that. I think the other thing is just be realize that American politics continually changes. Like we sort of think we're sort of stuck that we're just going to be these 7 states and everyone's going to campaign in these 3 counties in Wisconsin and that's going to decide our election.
Right.
In 10 years, the baby boom will be largely out of our politics. People that are young now, people that
Yeah.
became politically aware during Trump, like millennials and Gen X are going to be the largest generation, and like things will be considerably different in 10 years than they are now. And people, we are not going to keep the Congress is broken, but the Congress will fix itself in either ways that are like you and I would think are good or ways that are evil, but it will just be different than it is now. I
Yeah.
think the key part of this, like what we've learned during Trump, is there are ways we can get people engaged in politics. There are
Yeah.
ways people will pay attention more.
Oh yeah.
There is the ability to teach people and educate them more about like how the system works and how it's screwing us. And we just need to keep saying that over and over and over again.
Yeah. I mean,
The
during the
lessons of Bernie
yeah.
Sanders are
Yeah.
not like Bernie Sanders wasn't, he might not have won for president, but he's had a pretty big megaphone over the last 10 years. And there will be people that have been influenced by Bernie Sanders who will continue that going forward. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like, I think it's just never despair, never think that like, oh, democracy's over. What's the point? That's what Donald Trump, that's what Elon Musk, that's what all these people want us, Vladimir Putin, want us to do. The only way that like we can change that is get information to people, like tell people what's really going on, find the 20 people in your life who who like need some more of that information. Like my stepmother was like all upset the other day because of Nate Silver changing his projections, and it was just like, yeah, but just remember he wants to gain influence and attention. That's the one way to do it. And he's on a platform owned by Peter Thiel. And he's being amplified by Elon Musk's Twitter account.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, why don't people know that? And it's just like, I'm telling you that. So
No,
it's like we all have these like, yes, it's easier for Vladimir Putin and Russia to hack our brains and get right into the brains of people directly. But we also have tools that 30 years ago we didn't have. We have like different networks we have online that we have on our phone. Like this is one of the most powerful communication tools that known to mankind. We all have it, and we all have the ability to communicate facts to people. And it's just like one person influencing 100 people. And
yeah,
everyone doing that and being their own information warriors is how we're going to move
yeah,
from what we have now, which is not great, to something that is hopefully better.
yeah, yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. I think one of the sort of I'm an optimist, I think, like you, and one of the silver linings out there is seeing the shrinking of the influence of the mainstream media and the blossoming. I don't watch anymore. I mean, I stopped watching CNN and all that. I think what
Yeah, me
5
too.
years ago. That's it. That's enough. It's just the same thing. They say the same thing over and over again. They have a narrative and they stick to it. I watch left wing communists. I watch right wingers. I just want to understand where people are at. I just want to understand and I learn from everybody, right? I see some, where is the where is that guy that people call a lunatic? Where does he stand? And 90% of what he says is wrong, but there is something there that I can use to, like, for example, I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh, even though I detested his ass, because he gave me a sense of where the opposition stood. And if you don't understand where they stand, how can you strategize really, right?
Yeah,
And there is this bubbles that are being created that sort of insulate us from getting to understand, where does the other side stand? And so I'm sort of really optimistic about, let's call it the constellation of voices out there so that people can engage in these debates, can talk to each other, and they talk to each
yeah,
other. I think the bubbles are not as sort of hermetically sealed. Number one. Number two, I mean, the 4 years of Trump, and even during the transition where he was challenging everything, right? The courts held, right? And I think that was really sort of, even the Trump people who were nominated, or by Trump,
yeah.
they sided with, because when you are in a profession, even you have to keep your reputation. You cannot act like a crazy man, right? You have a whole collegian, right? If you're a lawyer, you have to act like a lawyer. You cannot just be a madman. Although we do have here and there.
We do have a
Uh,
couple of those on the court.
yes, we do for sure. It's not perfect, but I think it held to a certain extent. But
Yeah,
I agree 100% with you that the future generate or the current, Xer, the Gen Zs, and the millennials. I think they are coming in with a whole, a whole different kind of ethos that will, I think, will take us to a better place. Let's hope. Last thing is, what do you think is going to happen? Is it too early to there's a momentum happening right now. There's a lot of moving parts, and so forth. What do you think is going to happen if we can predict things?
um, I'm going to give the ultimate cop on it. I don't know. I can just sort of look at what the trend like. I didn't think there would be a big red wave in 2022 because the data didn't support it.
Yeah,
Um, I don't think Trump is going to get much more than 47% of the vote nationwide. I am concerned that it's just like all these swing states are way too close. Like
right.
I did not think there was a path for Joe Biden to win, and I didn't for like more than a year, just from looking at my own data. There's definitely a path for Kamala to win. She's competitive in places Biden was not, but we're talking about elections like that are going to be very close and won at the margins. I think there's a slight chance that this could be a rout, and that like we're looking at data and modeling based on the 2020 election. which was weird. And Democrats can run field programs and do things differently now that we're outside of COVID. But like the math makes it hard for the math can allow Trump to become president by getting 47% of the vote. It does not allow that for Kamala. And Kamala can get 51, 52% and maybe not win. I think it's probably more likely that she does, given that Trump really doesn't budge off his position. And for the House and Senate, like Kamala's going to win a lot of the same districts that are like in New York and other places that Biden won by like 8-10 points in 2020, but now have a Republican member. I think that it's so close there that I do not see how if Kamala wins by 10 points in some of these New York and California districts, that there are going to be enough people that are going to vote for Kamala and then vote for the Republican who they don't really know or don't really like that much. And the Senate's just hard because
how many seats are
like
up?
it does 33, but basically it's 51-49 now. But like we're not going to win. Joe Manchin's retirement in West Virginia, like we're not going to win that. So that brings Democrats down to 50. John Tester does not look like he's probably going to win in Montana. His opponent's polling over 50%. So that brings Democrats down to 49. They have to hold all the remaining seats. And I looked at this morning, all the potentially competitive seats, and the Republicans are not hitting more than 45% in any poll in any of them. And Democrats are sort of in the high 40s, 50s, which is where we need to be to win. And there's a couple of weird seats out there in Nebraska with an independent running against the Republican incumbent. Ted Cruz and Rick Scott being very unpopular in Texas and Florida, but it's still kind of a stretch. If I were to like have to put money on a number, it would probably be Republicans 51 seats and Democrats 49 at the end of this election, which will be tough for if Kamala is president to get nominations passed and get judges passed, but that's what she would have to figure out. I think if it's Trump with a Democratic House and a slightly Democratic House and a 51-49 Republican Senate, will be able to they will completely pass through all the judges and crazy appointments and everything. I don't see any of those 51 members effectively standing up to him at all if he becomes president. And that's probably the scariest part. It's just like there's no upside for them to go against him, which is weird because in theory he can't be reelected in 2028 and he's a lame duck president, but that's not how they behaved.
Because I mean he can just open his mouth and destroy somebody, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or I'm not a Republican. I can't even begin to understand what goes on over there.
If you were to give one piece of advice in terms of strategy I mean, you said at the beginning, cohesion of team is crucial. Cohesion of team is crucial, right? That, what would that be the thing you tell them? Just get your act together as a team?
I think that is definitely true. And I mean, cohesion is important, but there are exceptions to that because Biden had a very cohesive team, and that sort of led him astray. I think from what I've read, Kamala has a very cohesive team, and that she trusts her own instincts. That's what led her to pick Tim Walz. That's what led her to what she emphasized in a very effective speech. She does not. That team has a lot of pollsters on it, but from what I've read, her group is pretty much like, let's not worry about being eloquent in the speech. Let's just say what we believe. I think there was some criticism of some of her decisions by one of the pollsters, and it was said in CNN. It's like, oh, I'm just not going to listen. Like, I'm not going to talk to these people. You delegate that to all of you. I think that the thing that she has done most effectively is not second guess herself and to trust her instincts. And it's led her to have like probably the most successful 6 weeks in American politics. And we'll see on Tuesday night how whether that continues or not. I expect it will, but I think as long as she she knows who to listen to, and then she trusts herself, and that the people around her will second guess her, not to sound smart in the newspaper, but to just make sure they're going in the right direction. I think that should be enough to win this race.
Yeah.
Let's
Wonderful.
hope.
So yeah, well, thank you so much, Steve.
Thank
so
you.
much for putting up with me and for all the advice and the insights you've given me. You're the very first pollster I've spoken with deeply, so I do appreciate this conversation. I will ping you offline, get links that I want to share with the folks
Okay.
with the show notes. But again, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and we'll share it through Change Research and
Wonderful.
our channels. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.